Good morning. This is now the Special Interest Group of Security and Privacy in Speech Communication webinar. And today's topic is the Code of Conduct process for data management and in speech research. And I would like to focus here on the word process. So this is about creating a Code of Conduct. This is not presentation of a Code of Conduct, but how to create a code of conduct. So starting to draft the process. I will start with a motivation. So why do we need a code of conduct? And my issue is that currently we don't have any agreement on principles. So every researcher is on his own, every funding agency is on their own, and kind of universities create their own data management practices and interpretations of what is right. And with this I mean that so there's no agreement on concepts. For example, anonymization. What is an acceptable level of anonymization? When do we have to anonymize? It's easy to just say that we need to anonymize, but when we don't agree on how we do it, what is the required level, then that creates kind of confusion. The same applies for example, to consent. When do we need to ask for consent, and when can we allow subjects to withdraw consent? Or identifiability. What do we mean by that? So this lack of coherence, kind of creates confusion. Everyone is fighting for themselves. And the code of conduct now is primarily for individual researchers. We are all, or more or less all of us, are researchers. So then the kind of risks for us, this means, or this lack of coherence as a consequence, is legal action and lost opportunities. So the legal actions are now perhaps the worst case scenario. The consequences of legal actions will be really bad. The likelihood perhaps of legal action is probably lower, but the lost opportunities is actually kind of a risk which is likely to happen. It probably already has happened that someone got wrongly rejected in their applications or publications because of interpretation differences in data management practices. So I would say that it is entirely possible that different people interpret data management practices differently with good arguments. So in some sense, both have really valid arguments, but still they disagree. And that's what can lead to lost opportunities. And of course, privacy and security is kind of always about the users. So this confusion can put users at risk. So there are possible ethical violations, identity theft, humiliation, violation of all the usual risks of privacy violations. But so those are the bad consequences. Kind of the less likely but worse consequences. The more likely but less bad consequences is the bad user experience. So if data management is done badly, it can result in a bad user experience. But of course, now users usually are not in a position to influence data management practices. So the researchers can influence that, but they perhaps lack incentives often. The organizations are what really drive the incentives. So that's a really important part of this. So the risks for organizations are legal actions again, but kind of that those are then the bad, really bad consequences. But even a media scandal or public outcry, that is a bad consequence for organizations. For example, take interspeech. If there would be a large media scandal with regard to privacy or something else for interspeech, that would be a really kind of serious thing. The organization doesn't have legal power or kind of that doesn't have the funds to drive a large legal action or defense. So that could be fatal for the organization. So kind of managing these sort of risks is very important, and also organizations like this have the kind of they can implement tools to manage that. So they can put the incentives. For example, that there's in a conference there would be requirements on data management practices in the review process. Isn't very possible, and in that way, the organization could manage the risk. Okay, all right. So what is a code of conduct? Now, before going here, what is a code of conduct? I have to say that I'm not entirely certain that the code of conduct, so the word really, the name for the document should be really code of conduct. What I'm driving here is a kind of some sort of instructions or recommendations for data management. Whether the title is code of conduct or something else, that's a matter of discussion. But let's now just look at what is a code of conduct. So this paragraph here is now I copied it from Wikipedia, and it was made kind of about companies. So how companies can make a code of conduct. I changed that to association to apply for ISCA. Perhaps I just read it through here now. An association code of conduct is a set of rules which is commonly written for members of an association, which protects the community and informs the members of the association's expectations. It is appropriate for even the smallest association to create a document containing important information on expectations for members. The document does not need to be complex or have elaborate policies. So there is lots of text or lots of content in very small text. I think the first sentence really had a lot of it. So it's really about having rules. So that's kind of basically my issue with this, that I'm not certain which have rules or recommendations. But anyway, this is for the members. So both the individuals, teams, but also members in the sense of organizations. And then it's about the association's expectations, the community expectation. And it says that it's appropriate for even the smallest communities, associations. So ISCA is by no means small, but I think SINC is perhaps small, but I think the SINC can kind of take the role of making it for the whole community. The last sentence I think is really important. It does not need to be complex. I actually think that it should not be complex. There's a really big danger in the whole code of conduct business that it becomes so complex that people don't understand it. It becomes too much work to read about it, and because if it's too much work, no one will use it. So in this sense, it has to be simple. But what is missing from this thing is that it's really about the best of our knowledge. I think this concept which I now came up with is that there's lots of things in privacy which we cannot know. We know that we cannot know. For example, now how technology will improve in the next decade. We know that it will be improved, and we don't know where we will be in 10 years. That's really a kind of, I think we can all agree on that. So then we cannot know what the code of conduct should be in 10 years. The code of conduct therefore has to focus on today, what we know today, and what we want to kind of, what is our thinking today. And it's kind of important in the sense that if we don't know, then I would argue that no one can be expected or required to know. We do what we think is best, and that's the best we can do. And once we say that this is the best we can do, then people who have studied this less I guess they just should adapt to that. Also, they should they could rely on us. And then this is also about enabling the best possible research within ethical standards. So, of course, we could stop and say that best protection of privacy is to have no data at all. So we could stop all use of data. That would be the best possible protection. But that's not really productive. That's not realistic. So we do want to do research. So research is valuable in itself. We need to be able to allow that. So this is about finding the balance between research and preserving privacy and security. So it's about values. It's about managing risk and managing, finding the utility risk kind of balance. And that's a value question. So what is important to us? What type of things do we love, or what's important to us? Then objectives. So what do we want to achieve with this code of conduct? And what are the targets? First of all, target groups. I already mentioned earlier here that researchers and research teams, that's one group, reviewers, second group, and administrative bodies or organizations. So for each of these, I think we should have a list of use scenarios. For example, researchers, what do I need to do when using data? What do I need to do when publishing data? So if this, then that type of approach. And for reviewers, I didn't really mention the reviewers earlier before yet. So now I think it's important. Let's say thinking about reviews for an interspeech conference. there should be instructions for reviewers what they need to require with regard to data management. What are the signs they should look out for good data management? And this is now for publications, so conferences or journals, but also for applications or research plans and data management plans. And finally, the administrative bodies, I think there should be a list of responsibilities, what can be plausibly required from, let's say, conferences or funders or universities and so on. All right, different perspectives now, design objectives. So what should the document look like? Now this is really something which should be discussed. There's now just some like keywords I put out here, which I think are important. First of all, the start of why. If you haven't heard that concept before, check it out. It's an exciting concept, but for this purpose here now, it's that I think the document itself should state why this is important, and then every step of the way needs to connect to that why. So we should not just have rules, this is how you do it, but we need to have arguments why this rule is important and on what assumption it is based on. So basically like a math. We have assumption, kind of logical arguments based on this assumption, and the conclusion. And the conclusion is the rule. But I do fully expect that there's kind of a large proportion of actual use cases will land in a gray zone. We will not be able to do black and white rules. We have lots of gray zones, and in those cases, especially, it's important that the user of this code of conduct, so basically the researchers, kind of realize that now I'm in a gray zone, and what are the arguments, whether kind of for either side, so the white and black solutions. That so to be able to do the choices, they then in the gray zone, they have to understand the arguments and the assumptions, and to which extent they apply now in my particular case. And this also now helps in the sense that I don't want this to be something written in stone. This should be modifiable over time and a living document. So the more we have the motivation built in the document, the easier it is to then for the individual researchers to kind of see the flexibility in there. But this now sounds quite complicated. So for the design, it's really important. It's kind of the document is useful and easy to use. If it's not useful and easy, then no one will not use it. So it will kind of die. So basically, it should provide what is needed, but it should be at the same time compact. And that's basically the easy to read argument. That if it's 100 pages, then no one ever reads it. But it's not all about being short, but it should be also easy to read in the sense that there should be plain language. So, for example, acronyms, no acronyms unless it's really something. IBM is acronym everyone knows, but kind of even DFT is already an acronym that only engineers know. We shouldn't use that kind of acronyms. And legalese, I mean, only our lawyers will understand legalese. So it's really about using very simple language. The simpler, the better, as long as it remains accurate. A different aspect is that documents should only be about speech, in my opinion. So the world is already full of different data, generic data management rules. So something like storage. We don't need to define how to store data. There are so many other sources of that type of data management instructions that we should focus on that part of data management which is specific, special to speech. All right, then kind of document, what the document provides. This is now perhaps the most contentious part of this. I just put down here some keywords of possible structures. So, for example, list of potential threats and the potential remedies, templates for typical use cases. Perhaps that should be the other way around, that we have templates for typical use cases trying to cover broadly the areas of ISCA, and then so templates in the kind of sense that if this then that type of thing, and for if kind of for these use cases, if this use case, this is the list of potential threats, and this is the list of potential remedies for each one of them. All right, and then the time scope. So I mentioned already earlier that this shouldn't be not be written in stone type of document. This is a continuous process. The document should be a living document. It's never ending, continuous. There should be an expire date. We have, let's say we write this now in a year, so publish this next January, and we say that then in 3 years' time, this document expires and becomes invalid. So then we have to specify who has the responsibility to update it, and what is the date when it's at the latest should be updated. And this really is important because from the perspective of the current best of our knowledge, that we have to be aware that technology changes and our understanding improves. So then we cannot set in stone things which are going to change anyway. This puts now a bit of pressure on the quality side, that we have to be fast, in the sense that this is going to be old soon already anyway. So, but actually that can be taken as a relief, that we can publish something which is we are not entirely certain of. We can do an imperfect, or actually we should not strive for perfection. We should try to have something useful. So with the knowledge that we might make errors, we should still publish something which is useful, and then update it once we discover those errors. And how this actually now, this is also now very much just a proposal. And so how do we write that document in practice? So I kind of propose to do kind of a top-down structure. We start by defining our values. That will be kind of fuzzy and abstract the first iteration, and also define the objectives of document. That will probably be a bit abstract on the first iteration. But once we get down to choosing some areas, it gets more kind of, so what are the areas which we should cover? That's something where we can get concrete and then look at the specific sub areas. And then when we start to generalize and unify, then that will actually reflect, we discovered our weaknesses in the objectives will be defined, and kind of values, perhaps our values kind of didn't reflect, our defined values didn't reflect our true values, but our lack of understanding. So once we generalize, we can improve the values and objectives, And here in the process, we also should define terminology. And now here the kind of plain language becomes important. So we do need to define terminology. So we need to be accurate, but that doesn't mean that we have to be complicated. I don't know what, for example, anonymization is a word we can use. I mean, I think that it's a generally understandable word, but we don't want to use involve some terminology which is specific to some area, for example, engineering or legal words too much. And then we do have to iterate over this a few times. I don't expect to do it many times, but at least like twice. In parallel, we should find relevant background material. I haven't done a thorough search of other code of conducts, and also identify relevant organizations and can keep them continuously in the loop with some kind of frequency. And that brings us to involvement. So who is involved? I think it's obvious that we need a working group, and then not all have time and resources to participate. So then regularly we would comment back to the SIG and then request comment once we have some sort of document which is like acceptable quality. Then we can request comments from a wider audience. And then if we get kind of significant comments, so then we can do a major revision, or if it's just small details, then we can even proceed to publishing it right away. Long-term goals. So these are when it's kind of published into some level. So I would think it's appropriate to have a presentation at InterSpeech for the kind of community. I think after that sometime, I'm hoping that it would be like a community standard, so ISCA would adopt it, say that this is how we want to operate. And we could even propose it to the, for example, European Data Protection Supervisor or other large bodies. I think it could be something in the US or let's say Japan or something like that, that they would adopt this as a community standard. I cannot just give them the seal of approval. I don't really know how that would work, but I heard that that's possible. And more specifically, I propose a monthly working group meeting. So now this is now the first one. Now this, of course, this webinar is now offset by 1 week because of the new year. So perhaps this could continue that the working group meets on every second Monday of the month on Zoom, or if anyone has a GT server or something which is more open. There's reporting back to the SIG, so the wider community, at least perhaps something like 6 months would be, I think, would be an appropriate interval. Again, that could be then a webinar or seminar talk. I think progress is the only thing important. We should progress. I don't expect this to take forever, but so the biggest danger is that it dies off. So we should really push for movement forward, and if it keeps moving forward, it will finish sooner or later. And the actual document and kind of discussions, I propose to do it on Google Docs or a similar platform. I don't have access to other alternatives. If someone has suggestions, let me know. But the kind of, in this case, I don't see Zoom or Google being very problematic, because the process should be transparent and inclusive. So the only thing we have to avoid is trolling, and at least so far I haven't seen any trolls, so I'm not too worried about that. So, but kind of, I think transparency and inclusivity is extremely important. So we need to have wide acceptance of this code of conduct for it to be widely adopted. All right, I think that was the things I had to discuss here or to present here. Now kind of it's time to proceed to a discussion phase. I don't really know what will be the topics for discussion, but so I really look forward for any comments on this whole document. Now this presentation part was pre-recorded, so the actual discussion will not be recorded now. So we are really free to discuss, and let's move from here forward.